Loss and grief are complex emotions that many adopted children may experience at different points in their lives. Today, we explore those sensitive topics, offering guidance on how to navigate those emotions with compassion and understanding.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adopted Gals podcast. I am your host, Howard Zabel,
And I am Famata Warfield.
and we're so excited to have you back once again. So today we're going to be really talking and delving deep into a topic that touches the hearts of a lot of adopted children, youth, and even adults. And this topic is about loss and grief. Now, it's crucial to recognize and understand and address these emotions to foster healing and resilience over time.
First, we have to acknowledge that loss and grief comes with adopted children, whether you were adopted when you were a baby or in our case when we were like 8 and 9. It's something that we have to acknowledge and not necessarily push underneath the rug, because those children that have lost like biological connections, cultural ties, or a sense of identity. And it's very important to validate that in your child's life and to make them comfortable in talking about their loss and grief.
Um, yeah, overall, I think loss and grief may be a challenging topic to really have with your child, and even as an adoptee to grapple with, to navigate and find ways to cope with these type of emotions. But it's important for you to face it head on rather than letting it just sink in and create a deeper and deeper hole within yourself. The sooner
Mhm.
you're able to acknowledge, the sooner you're able to talk about it, I think the better your healing experience will be, the faster your healing experience will be as well.
Yeah,
So,
and it's important you as the parent, because sometimes I can see on your perspective why it might be hard, because you're like, I'm giving you this opportunity. Like, I don't want you to be sad of what you lost, but I feel like as a parent you need to put your feelings aside. And it's not to say when you talk about their loss and grief that they rather be where they came from. That's not what it necessarily means. Like, in doing this, you're fostering a way to the child to grieve and start to love you and accept you as their new family. So don't necessarily get emotional in feeling like they don't love you at all. That is not the case at all.
right. And, a lot of times when people think about grief, they think
Mhm.
about like death or,
Yeah.
detachment from birth family, right? That's a certain type of loss and grief.
Hmm.
Um, but there's other types of loss that an adopted child has as well when they do get adopted.
Hmm.
And, some other types of loss would be cultural heritage, right?
Hmm.
Even if it's not international adoption,
Hmm.
even if it's within, if it's within the states or local adoption, they're still losing some sense of culture if
Hmm.
they are transracially adopted, right?
Hmm.
And then, I think it's just important to take these type of losses just as serious as losing, a family member or a friend,
Hmm.
an actual person.
Hmm.
And, by acknowledging these losses and putting seriousness behind it,
Hmm.
even though you may not understand the loss because you haven't experienced that, it
Hmm.
can be, the first step toward understanding and healing.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna give a couple of examples on what we're talking about when we talk about loss. I mean, the obvious one, losing your parents, that's huge. That is a loss in itself. And also you have to acknowledge like the food, the culture. Like, that is one thing I think both of us, I can say, missed a lot. The food and the culture, and how we used to gather together and dance and have fun together, where in America, where how we grow up, how I grew up, where we didn't necessarily have that. So those are the type of examples when we talk about loss as well. And also the language.
Oh
That's
yeah.
one other thing I gotta add, because we both lost our languages. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like the older I get, the more I kind of like, I'm sad about it. I'm like, dang, I really wish I had somebody that, could have helped me speak my language. And that's not once again to blame you as the parent. It just happens because you don't speak the language. You were just trying to give somebody a better life. It's not blaming you.
Right. It's
Yeah.
very natural,
Yeah.
especially, and I think speaking on the language, for
Hmm.
me, I had that feeling where I was like, when I was younger, I didn't like my heritage, right? After I got adopted, I was running away from my true
Yeah.
self. So
Same.
I was trying so hard to assimilate
Hmm.
and not have any inch of accent. I didn't want anyone to be able to, like, if someone spoke to me, I wanted them to be like, wow, you're African? I can't even hear it in your voice, right? And I'm ashamed to say that now because over the years, as I grew up, I'm like, I'm so jealous when I see Africans and they have that accent, and they can switch back and forth when they're speaking with their people and they have that strong accent. And it's just, I think it just adds again emphasis on your culture, being able to connect with your people in a
Yeah.
different way that I can no longer connect with
Hmm.
them in that way.
Hmm.
So it really is a grief. We're laughing about it now, and but there were points in my life where I was trying to find somebody to
Yeah.
hire to teach me how to speak my native language.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not commonly, spoken. There's not a large group of people in America that speak, my
Hmm.
native language. So didn't really
Hmm.
get too far with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think taking it seriously, no matter, whether or not you can understand. I think just being able to um,
Yeah.
foster that, environment of like understanding is important.
Okay.
Speaking of fostering environment,
Right. So when it comes to fostering an environment, you have to be able to create a safe space for your child to feel like they can talk about their losses and their griefs. And I highly encourage you to encourage your child to also talk about it. Like, Howard and I, we were ashamed of our culture a little bit because we were trying to fit into this environment. Even though they may feel like that, still, encourage them. Still be like, even though you feel like this, know that if your feelings change, you can always come and talk to me about it. No matter how old you get, no matter how, things may have changed, come to me and talk to me about it. And I just feel like having something like that is so healthy. And luckily for me, my family did create that environment. My mother and my father made it very clear where they did not want me to forget where I came from. They did not at all. They're like, you're going to remember where you came from. Okay. And then in part of that, making me comfortable in speaking about my family, and they put me through therapy and talking about the things that I've lost, and also having that emotional connection with my family and talking to them and still having a connection with them. Yeah.
yeah, and
It
I
helps.
would say the same thing for myself too. Like, I think my family definitely created that environment where I could come to speak to them.
Mhm.
Now, there's some topics where I just didn't feel like they would necessarily understand,
Yep.
right? So I didn't feel comfortable coming to them, which, why mentorship is important. We'll talk later a little bit more about that.
Mhm.
Um, but even therapy, some topics I just did not feel comfortable talking about that. But what I
Mhm.
did recognize is that my parents did go out of their way to show
Mhm.
me that, they can, talk to me about like um
Yeah.
race, about losing my language, about missing my family. Like I could come to them and be like, I really wish I had known my mom, my birth mom a little bit more, my
Mhm.
birth dad. Like I'm missing them in this moment. I wish I was not adopted,
Mhm.
they never shamed my feelings. They never shamed my thoughts because they understood that was natural, like for me
Mhm.
to feel this way. And
Mhm.
so I think it's important to, create that environment where your child feels like, okay, maybe my parents won't understand, but
Yeah.
at least they're going to hear me out. At least they're going to give me a few minutes for me to express
Mhm.
myself, and they're not going to shame me or get mad or take it personal and feel like
Yeah.
they're attacking you or anything like that. They
Mhm.
generally, your kids just generally want to know that mom and dad is going to be there to listen to them. That's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
It's
no
true
need to take it personal. Like,
at all. Like it really has nothing to do with you in a way. I promise. Like it's not, they're not trying to hurt you. And I also think in also helping your child trying to get, with grief and loss and the things that they may have missed, try to incorporate their culture with yours, like in your household. Like if you're living in a diverse area, have the food, try to learn how to make the food, try to make the food with them. You know what I mean? Like bring their culture into your household where it helps them feel more comfortable in speaking and opening up.
Mm.
Right, because when you bring that in, it makes it, oh, okay, they're trying to learn who I am. And it's not just me coming into this world and I just have to learn everything about them. But then they forget about my stuff in a way. I hope that kind of makes sense. You know what I'm talking about? How like
No, it
that's
makes sense
I would,
because it's
yeah,
like it makes sense because it's almost like getting rid of the outsider type
yeah,
of feeling for the child. So it
yes,
feels like your culture, who you are, is welcome and it's part
yes,
of. We don't have to go outside all the time
yeah,
to acknowledge and celebrate who you are. We can
hmm,
do that in this house.
as well.
And part of that is talking about the grief and loss, but also
Hmm,
celebrating your culture. And I think that
hmm,
is so important.
it
And I
is.
think that's one thing actually I wish my parents maybe did a little bit more of is
Me
incorporating
too.
my culture
Hmm,
into the household as well. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't, my family has different. They're Jewish, but
hmm,
they celebrate Christmas at the same time, so they have a lot going on. But still, it's just like would have been helpful to see like maybe even simple things like
yeah,
pictures that were put up of African
yeah,
people or music
yeah,
that was played that was African music and
yeah,
just normalizing our culture in the household that was not a thing. So I
yeah,
really would have appreciated that to happen. And so again, it fosters that environment of, okay, whatever you have to bring to me,
hmm,
as your mother, as your father, we
hmm.
are understanding because we're welcoming of everything that you are.
Yeah, and it's also speaking positive affirmations into themselves and be like, you belong here. You belong here. Your culture belongs here. You being with us, I accept you and your culture, and I don't want you to be ashamed because I think it's a beautiful culture and I want to learn more. I want to create this as a way for us to bond even more because I appreciate where you come from. And so, talking about, because, now me just thinking and how we were ashamed, maybe if our parents may have, and I'm not blaming our parents, they were doing the best that they can. Maybe if they would have taken that approach of, don't be ashamed of it. I love your culture. You know what I mean? Like talking to them, gassing them up and be like, it's such a beautiful culture and let's talk about it. Let's bring it in. It's a beautiful thing because we do come from a beautiful culture, and and being part of our new culture is also beautiful. So putting those two things together, I feel like it's just a recipe for just love.
Yes.
Love in the house.
Yeah. So in conclusion about, fostering, you have to foster an environment
Hmm,
filled with trust.
hmm,
So that your children can feel comfortable exploring their emotions and
hmm.
finding healthy ways to cope with their grief. And you should be the first person that they feel comfortable coming to at the end of the day. Because then, if they don't feel comfortable with coming to you, they're going to seek external help and support, and sometimes it might not be in the right areas. So.
Yeah, and it's gonna come out a different way. So one of the most important things when it comes to loss and grief and talking about it is communication. And when I say communication, sometimes your child may not communicate with you verbally. So here are some of the signs. And okay, let me start over. Communication is key. Encourage your adopted child to express themselves through like words, art, other outlets. And sometimes this act of sharing their feelings can be a very therapeutic process. And sometimes your child may also communicate with you on them experiencing loss and grief in a non-verbal way. Like for example, for me, I would retreat into myself and
Mm.
I would kind of be quiet when it comes to around family functions or games where I felt like I'm looking out inward and I'm just like out here, if that makes sense. And if they're quiet and their mood changes, I would try and go talk to them, be like, hey, what's on your mind? Is there anything you want to talk about? And if they say nothing, give them a little bit of time to themselves, or let them know, hey, if you don't want to talk about it right now, we can talk about it later. And just kind of opening that line of them, letting them know, hey, you can come and talk to me and we can communicate about whatever is going on in your head.
Right. And similarly to you, Fatmata, I
Mhm.
actually, the way I shut down a lot as well as in my youth because I
Mhm.
didn't have the verbiage to be able to communicate how
Mhm.
I was feeling, why therapy was so important, right? Going back to,
Mhm.
therapy, but um, I didn't have the verbiage. I didn't know how to cope with these feelings.
Mhm.
And especially when you first adopt a child, you're learning each other. You're learning how to communicate with each other. You're learning how to be in the quiet space with each other. So you're fostering a space of trust, and it does take time,
Mhm.
but you want to get to a point where you have an open door policy where your children
Mhm.
can talk to you, about anything,
Mhm.
whether that be just with you and them or through therapy. But
Mhm.
I know it can be challenging to talk to your child when they do shut down. That was very challenging for my parents because
Yeah.
I used to have a lot of like anger issues. It was just all my feelings were just bottled up, and I just did not know how to let my parents know how I was feeling. So I would always bottle it in, and
Mhm.
it made me very numb.
Mhm.
It made me very numb to like the pain I was having, the good times, and it just made me not really want to explore relationship with my family.
Mhm.
However, again, just the fact that my parents were able to continuously show up for me over
Mhm.
time, I think it didn't happen really until I was an adult. So this might be a long ride for you as a parent, but as an adult, after I graduated from high school, that's when I started to really lean on my family, start to
Mhm.
really understand my emotions more, start to really want to heal for myself, not just because
Mhm.
I was put in therapy and that's just supposed to happen, but I wanted to heal. I wanted to connect with my family. So I was
Mhm.
able to communicate more with my family. But something that I think, a parent could do, when they do have a child that's maybe shutting down,
Mhm.
maybe instead of having to always talk, because sometimes when you're shut down,
Mhm.
you don't want to talk, you don't want to communicate. You're
Mhm.
angry at that person. The other person is the enemy at that point, right?
Mhm.
I made my adoptive family the enemy a lot of times. I didn't want to talk to them.
Mhm.
Them wanting to talk because they're talkers, with them wanting to talk to me made me even more angry.
Mhm.
Maybe even more rebellious and wanted to just shut down even more.
Mhm.
So in those moments, I think sometimes words aren't always the way to get through
Mhm.
someone's head. You might have to find other ways of communication that are
Mhm.
nonverbal, such as writing notes,
Mhm.
right? Writing in journal,
Mhm.
right? Maybe have a journal for your child when they're young for them to write and express themselves.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of like a diary, but where they write when they're angry and just tell them, hey, I know you're going through a hard time. You don't even have to talk to me. Here
Mhm.
is maybe a recorder that they can record their voice talking about their emotions, or
Mhm.
write a journal,
Mhm.
write in their diary of how they're feeling, and
Mhm.
just have it be at that. Sometimes that's all the children need, is that outlet to be able to release
Mhm.
the feelings
Mhm.
they're having and that they can't verbalize. So
Mhm.
hopefully that's insightful and like helpful advice for parents who are struggling with children who maybe are shutting down.
Yeah, and I also want to add that sometimes your children being young, they may not have the vocabulary to talk about some of that stuff, to get out what they're feeling, even if they're in therapy. And one thing I'm gonna use my family as an example. They gave me a lot of therapy, and a lot of that stuff I didn't take in. And because I didn't take it in, it's not because I didn't want to. Well, I didn't know. I felt like I was being treated like a bad child in that sense, and I couldn't. I was a child. I couldn't necessarily take in that information or say what I was feeling at that time. And so there you might find yourself where there's going to be like this emotional fight between each other, because you're like, I'm giving you all of these tools and all of this, and you're not taking it, and it's just making things harder. And it's not necessarily the child is actually trying to make it harder on you. It's they sometimes just can't communicate what they're feeling in their heads. Even if being in therapy, they just don't know what they're feeling and how to deal with that, even if you're giving them the tools sometimes. And honestly, to be honest, you might have to just wait to like they're adults, for them to actually process some of those emotions. And
Yeah, that
I
happened with
know,
me.
and I know that's a long ask and a long emotional thing, but I feel like if you let your child just have that, they're gonna. When I started going to therapy when I was older, I would come back to my parents and be like, "Mom, you were right. Mom, Dad, I am sorry I said that, and I should have taken that stuff seriously. But now I'm an adult. They'll come back. They'll come back and apologize."
And
Yeah.
here's one thing my mentor told me. He's not adopted, but
Mhm.
he's a mentor to me. And one thing he said that stuck to me, advice to parents is you always want to continue to show up.
Mhm.
in any way that you can. Continue to
Mhm.
show up. You're going to fail over and
Mhm.
over again. You're
Mhm.
going to seem like the mean mom, the mean
Mhm.
dad, the bad cop, but you just continue to show up over and over. And guess what? When the
Mhm.
child becomes older, an adult, they're able to recognize, and sometimes
Mhm.
not even waiting until they become 18, maybe until they become teenagers. They'll be able
Mhm.
to recognize that you were able to show up for them
Mhm.
every
Yeah.
single day, no matter how challenging it
Mhm.
was, but you never gave up on them. And
Mhm.
so, in a way, it's almost like when the child recognizes that when they're older and they start going
Mhm.
through their challenges as a young adult, they're going to need people to lean on. So, they're going to want to lean on you because they
Mhm.
remembered the support system you provided for them. They remember that
Mhm.
you never gave up on them. So, the key is hold on strong, don't
It's
give up,
hard.
don't give your kids back, and just keep showing up.
Yeah.
And, as an adult, you guys might not become best friends, but they'll be
Yeah.
able to respect you and they'll be
Mhm.
able to love you in a different way because you never gave up on them.
Yeah.
So
So true. Well put, girl. Well put.
thank you, hun.
Mhm.
So yeah, so to conclude that, it's important to engage in open and honest conversations, answering any questions that your children may have, and provide age appropriate information about their adoption story. So yeah.
Okay. And one of the biggest things, honestly, that I feel like is the number one out of all of these segments is therapy. Therapy, therapy, therapy. Put your child into therapy. And I feel like this is something that's going to help them open up and also help them feel seen and heard. And when you put them in therapy, make it clear that it's between them and the therapist as well. Like if they only want to talk about certain things only with their therapist, then let them have that. Don't try to make them open up to you and what they talked about. And I feel like in doing so, you are giving them that space in because you're not badgering them to talk to you about what they talk about in therapy. They might eventually come around and be like, you know what, I feel a little more comfortable in me sharing my emotions with my therapist. So I'm going to come to you and also share that with you. And also when they're in therapy, their therapist is going to, try to help them on how to communicate with you as the parent and the things that they are going through. And I just feel like that is so helpful in having your child into putting them into therapy.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that when you're going to a professional, seeking a professional, you want to think about it from a holistic point of view, right? Because when you're adopting a child, especially if they're different culture, different race, and from a different country, this is going to
Hmm.
be a whole different experience for your whole family, not just for the adoptive child.
Hmm.
Your child is going to be going through changes, right? But your family is going to, if you have biological children or you have a spouse, I advise that you all go to therapy,
Yes.
family therapy.
Hmm.
I think Fatmata can speak more on that, and even
Hmm.
myself, right? So my family, me and my parents went to therapy together.
Hmm.
So we had, that time together. But I
Hmm.
also have two sisters who are biological to my adoptive family. They
Hmm.
never went to therapy with us, and so I feel like part of it is because by the time I got adopted, they were almost, they were later on in their high school years about to go off to college. So the time
Right.
was kind of, off. But if you have children that are closer together in age, I
Hmm.
advise you to go to therapy with them because, in a way, I feel like me and my sisters, my siblings don't really fully understand each other. We don't really have a close relationship with each other. And I wish we
Hmm.
did.
Hmm.
But if you can start young, I
Hmm.
would definitely advise that. And I think Fatmata can speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, and that's one thing I wished and that my parents did was put everybody in therapy. And I also know that in saying that, I also have to look at their perspective because one, therapy is really expensive. Like a whole family, and our family was at this time was like a family of six. So that's a lot of money. So they had spent all this money and bring me to America, and then they're like, "Oh, now you got to do therapy." So, I do. If you can find that outlet, and if you can afford it, therapy would be so helpful. And everybody sitting and talking is gonna help. And when you're in this session, don't make it solely about the adopted kid because you're going to make them feel ostracized.
Mhm.
You have to make it into this is, this is an adoption, that a journey that we all took. Even the adopted child, this is a journey that she's took too, because it's not just about us. And when you're sitting in that session and talk about, everything, like the biological children may be feeling a little bit neglected because the new adopted child is basically getting the attention, not
Yeah.
because parents are being evil, is because that child needs it right now. One, helping them how to acclimate into this new environment and helping them with their past traumas. The biological children are going to feel that way. So give the biological children, voice too. So talk to your parents and how, that makes you feel, and how to figure out how to help everybody. We'll create a different video and talking and diving a little deeper, and
Right.
everybody going to therapy, because that is so important and necessary to have. And I just feel like that sets up a foundation where a lot of things that are not necessarily that may have happened or are going to happen will not happen. And I feel like everybody becomes closer and a stronger family. And it's really helpful. It's something that we highly suggest.
Absolutely. And also on top of having a therapist, I think most people who are getting into adoption know
Hmm.
that a therapist is good to
Hmm.
have, is an important like tool for
Hmm.
the family and a resource.
Hmm.
I want to push even further. I think in addition to having a therapist, or if
Hmm.
you don't have a therapist,
Hmm.
I would say get a mentor for
Yeah.
your adoptive child.
Hmm.
Now, what I mean by mentor is someone who is a role model,
Hmm.
preferably. I don't even want to say preferably. I think it has to be someone that mirrors your adoptive child. What I mean by that is find a role model, a mentor that shares similar background
Hmm.
with your child. So for us, someone who is
Hmm.
African, they don't necessarily have to be from Sierra Leone, but
Hmm.
someone who is of African descent, who understands the culture of being African in America,
Hmm.
right? So if you adopted a Hispanic child,
Hmm.
find a mentor that has, Hispanic heritage, that is able to
Hmm.
teach not necessarily teach, but they're just there to
Hmm.
share the experience with the adoption, your adoptee,
Hmm.
your adopted child, right? It
Hmm.
just makes it so much easier to know that there is someone who looks like you, who is
Hmm.
on your side, who is
Hmm.
going to support you. You can always come to them to talk about any topic and not feel like bad or shamed. Um, it's just really important to have someone who mirrors your culture. And for me, I think I didn't really start having appreciation for my adoption and my family and respect for my family
Hmm.
until I met a mentor who was
Hmm.
Black. And he was, after talking to him and hanging out with him, going to different environments, I had more Black people and just like learning what it meant to be Black and
Hmm.
African. He was also African descent.
Hmm.
After I started doing that, every now and then he would foster some little um, like speeches and values into me about like respect
Hmm.
for family and loving for family and how much my family has been there for me. It
Hmm.
wasn't until I met him that my eyes were open. I was like, wow, like my
Hmm.
family really are here for me. Like I don't have to hate my family just because I'm from a different culture or
Yeah.
because they don't look like me. I can still respect
Yeah.
them and also celebrate who I am. My family doesn't have to be everything for me. You know what I mean? They can
Right.
just be the loving, supportive foundation for me, and I can, experience my culture outside of them as well. So again,
Beautiful.
mentorship is
Beautiful.
very important. So be on the lookout because pretty soon we have something that's coming up that has to do with mentorship. So, just be on the lookout for that.
Hmm. That's perfect. Beautiful, girl. That is so true. So in conclusion, navigating loss and grief for adopted children, it requires empathy and it requires openness, patience, and communication. And remember that every child's experience is unique, and that to not take it personal, and that fostering this type of environment is really healthy and beneficial to both the adoptee and the adoptive parents. And this is a way that, sets a foundation that, basically projects, on the rest of your relationship in moving forward. It's really important to have that space for your child to be able to speak about what they've lost.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, that's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we love having you guys here. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share, feel free to leave a comment. We want to hear any loss or grief stories that you may have.
Mhm.
And it's great to have that community to share each
Mhm.
other's stories. We're here to support one another on this journey because adoption can be a challenging, but at the end of the day, it can be
Mhm.
very fulfilling experience as well. And until next time, take care. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe,
Mhm.
and comment on our videos. Thank you.
Bye.